Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Yulia and today we're gonna have an interesting talk. Today we're gonna talk about era of the models in the 90s, why the heroin chic was in and what created that specific movement in the industry. So let's get started. Today, the fashion industry sells us a very clear image of what a model looks like. She loves her body. She works out to feel good, not to be thin. She takes care of her mental health. She balances her work and personal life. Health, strength, glowing skin, energy. These are what's in fashion right now. You look at the industry today, it almost seems like it was always this way. It wasn't. If you went back just 35 years ago into the world of high fashion, you would see a completely different reality. Scandals, drugs, and glamour. That was the fashion industry of the 90s. Today, we're going to talk about what that world was actually like, what heroin chic was, the designers and celebrities who defined it, the parties, and what it left behind. Let's begin. The term heroin chic didn't come from inside the fashion industry. Nobody intervened it as an official label. It came from outside, from journalists and critics trying to find words for something new and uncomfortable they were seeing on magazine pages and the runways. Two words that have no business being next to each other. Chic, which style, elegance, and fashion. Heroin, exhaustion, addiction, distraction. That contrast is exactly what it made the term so sharp and so impossible to ignore. What it looked like: models who didn't just look thin, they looked exhausted. Not just natural, but absent. Pale skin, dark circles, a look in the eyes that was somewhere else completely. This was not the beauty as a display. It was a beauty as a feeling, fragilely, vulnerably, something accidentally captured by camera. And this became what the industry called beautiful. Fashion didn't create this atmosphere, it reflected it. And then it amplified it. And very quickly, it became an aesthetic. To understand how heroin chic happened, you have to understand the 80s first. The 80s in fashion were completely about performance. The supermodels of the era, Linda Evangelista, Naomi Campbell, Claudia Schiffer, they weren't just models, they were symbols. Beauty that was bold, polished, almost unattainable. It said, I have everything under control. But by the end of the decade, that image started to lose its power. When the perfection became too consistent, it stopped feeling real. The economy shifted, instability grew, and the perfect glossy world of 80s started to feel staged, like an advertisement for life that didn't exist. People became more interested in what looked real, even if that real was tired, cold, or broken. And so the bright, untouchable image of the 80s slowly gave way to something more stripped down, colder, more minimal. That is where heroin chic began to take a shape. The two most important designers of this era when it comes to heroin chic are Calvin Klein and Marc Jacobs. Calvin Klein understood what was happening in a culture before anyone else did. His campaigns from the early 90s were stripped of everything that didn't need to be there. No elaborate sets, no bright colors, just a young girl, a white background, and a piece of clothing that almost felt secondary to the mood. The image was the product. The feeling was what he was selling. And it worked. Those campaigns are still some of the most discussed images in the fashion industry. Marc Jacobs did something even more radical. In 1993, while working for Perry Ellis, he showed what became known as a grunge collection. Models in flannel skirts, knit hats, clothes that looked like they came from the thrift store, and show was a sensation. Then he was fired for it. Perry Ellis didn't want to be grunge, but that collection became one of the most influential of the decade because it provided the aesthetics that moved beyond photography and into the actual clothes. Heroin Chic didn't live only inside the fashion, it was connected to everything happening in culture at the same time. The music world was the other half of this story. Kurt Cobain and Nirvana were not fashion figures, but the aesthetics of grunge. The deliberate projection of polish and performance ran perfectly parallel to what was happening on the runways. That was not coincidental. That was the same culture feeling expressing itself throughout two different mediums at the same time. Courtney Love became the celebrity face of this world, the chaos, the glamour, the destruction, all visible at once. She wasn't trying to be beautiful in the traditional sense, she was trying to be real. And that combination of mass and magnetism was exactly what the era celebrated. The films did the same thing. Train Spotting, Pulp Fiction, Kids, not glamorizing drugs, but making the visual language of what the world feel electric. Fashion was watching all of it and absorbing all of it. When fashion, music, and film are all saying the same thing at the same time, that is when the real culture movement happens. The images were created in studios, the clothes were designed in ateliers, but the world that made all of it possible happened at night. New York in the 90s had a nightlife that doesn't exist anymore. The limelight, the tunnel. On any given night, you could be standing next to a supermodel, a musician, a designer, a photographer, all in the same room, all part of the same energy. And the fashion world lived in these spaces. A shoot would finish at 7 in the evening, and then the night would continue. Clubs, parties, more clubs, you still had to appear as if nothing had happened. What this meant is that the people making the images were living inside the same atmosphere they were trying to capture. The dark circles in the photographs were not always makeup. The exhaustion was not always art direction. That is what makes the image from this era like documents, not fashion photographs. And this connects to something I want to mention quickly. The body standards of this era had a real consequences for models, for girls watching from outside, for how a whole generation thought about food, weight, and what healthy looked like. I made a video about my own relationship with the food, what I actually eat as a working model, and why the model diet is a complete myth. The link is right here, worth watching alongside with this one. Why is Kate Moss the symbol of that era? She didn't plan it. She was a teenager, 17-year-old girl when she started appearing in early Calvin Klein campaigns. She wasn't trying to create new aesthetics. She was just a young girl in front of the camera. What happened is a simpler than deliberated choice. The fashion industry was already moving toward a new visual language, more minimal, more raw, less performance, and Kate Moss simply matched that moment almost perfectly. She was not overstyled. She didn't project power. She was something quieter and more fragile about her presence than anything in industry has been seen before. And that was different enough to change the entire industry. The Calvin Klein campaigns had almost none of the traditional fashion noise, minimal sets, cold lights, simple poses, empty space. But that emptiness wasn't neutral, it was charged. There was a tension in it. Emotional ambiguity you couldn't look away from. So her image became a reflection of the spirit of the era: fragility, minimalism, and emotional distance as the visual code of generation. Heroin Chic turns out to be more than just a strange episode of the 90s fashion. It was a moment when the fashion industry briefly stopped selling an idea and started selling a state of fatigue, silence, and distance. And it is in that fragile balance that the aesthetic reaches its peak and its limit. Because any aesthetics that reflects its own time too accurately cannot last long. By the end of the 90s, the industry shifted again back toward the body, toward energy, toward health, toward a sense of life rather than emptiness. Heroin Chic didn't disappear because people decided it was wrong. It disappeared because fashion got tired of it, the same way it always gets tired of everything. What it left behind is more complicated. Millions of girls grew up looking at those images and learning without anyone ever saying it loud what beautiful was supposed to look like. I entered this industry after the worst of this era was already over, but the echo was still in there. What we have today, the wellness culture, the healthy body, is not the opposite of what came before. It was the same pendulum, just in a different place. And this where the story gets even more interesting, because when the 90s ended, it swung harder in the other direction. A completely different world, different models, different designers, different standards, low-rise jeans, Paris Hilton, the early reality TV era, and its own set of problems that nobody talks about enough. I'm going to cover all of that in the next episode. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and tell me more in the comments. What do you remember most about the 90s aesthetics? Did you grow up seeing these images? I want to know. Bye.